Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, MDT RFT Data Treatment and Interpretation. My name is Abdullah Abdurrahman. I am business developer in Reservoir Solutions. So we will start by 5 minutes presentation about Reservoir Solutions and introduce our instructor for our today webinar. So first of all, Reservoir Solutions is a company specialized in providing technical studies and courses for oil and gas companies and professionals. The company incorporates many professionals with diverse technical background related to oil and gas exploration and production. Our services include technical reservoir studies, field development planning, reservoir static and dynamic modeling, economic feasibility studies, technical support for academic researchers like PhDs and master degrees. Also, we are assisting in writing technical papers and publishing. We have technical petroleum courses by industry expertise and also providing mentorship programs. For the upcoming workshop that will be done in June and July, we have course for petroleum economics that will start at 15th of June. This course will be 1 week. We will have 5 sessions during this week, elaborating all the concepts and the case studies that can be found or can be exerted for petroleum economics. For more details about this course, we will send the link into the Zoom chat. Also, we have another workshop that will be into July. It will be for integrated production modeling that will include how to model the wells, the natural flowing, the artificial lifted wells, and so on, how to model reservoir, how to model the surface production network. All of that will be integrated in one model to help to assist and take decisions according or for the production optimization. For more details about this workshop, we will send the link for the technical content into the Zoom chat. The instructor for our today webinar, it's Mr. Paolo Martini. Mr. Paolo Martini is a director and consultant petroleum geologist in Geopass company in Morocco. He has about 33 years of oil and gas geology experience, including but not limited to exploration, appraisal and development, project administration, managing diverse and multicultural teams working on a variety of subsurface related projects, wellsite geology and operation, petrophysics, reservoir and development geology, prospect evaluation, license administrations, service company supervision, cost control expertise built upon a long and fruitful career over 5 continents. For our webinar rules, please, if you have any question, you can drop it into the Zoom chat. Please mute your microphone and camera. In case that you wanted to get a certificate for attendance, you can fill into the form that will be sent into the Zoom chat. For the upcoming events, you can join our Telegram channel and follow our LinkedIn page and our YouTube channel to get information about our upcoming events. This is our mail and WhatsApp for more information. So thank you all for your time attending this session, and Mr. Paolo, you can start now.
Okay, thank you very much. I will start by just sharing my screen so you can all see the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everybody for willing to hear what I have to say.
Okay.
Can you see the full screen presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, excellent, good. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say that this is not a training. It's just I just want to share some of the experience that I have. This is not intended to be a full-fledged course on how to treat and interpret RFD data. It's just some ideas that I collected along the way, and I'd like to share with you today. So I will talk about why do we take pressure data, what they are good for, Some basic checks that I recommend doing before the interpretation of the data. QC and filtering of the data, mainly based on supercharging or let's say the drawdown mobility. And then some interpretation techniques, which include line fitting, excess pressure plot, and gradient plots. And then I will show you some interesting cases that I found or I worked on in my career. So let me just check. Okay, can you see the pointer as a red dot?
Yes, yes, we can see.
Excellent. Okay, next slide. Okay, so why do we take pressure data? Pressure data can give us a lot of information about the fluids that are in the formation. Their density, their composition, their type, and they help volumetric calculations. We can establish the contacts, the elevation of the contacts between two different fluids. We can understand something about compartmentalization of a oil field, or establish if a sequence of sands are in communication or are just stacked, separated reservoirs. We can detect overpressure, which can help calibrate geomechanical models, which are very important for subsequent drilling and production. We can also understand something about the how much of the trap volume is filled, so the fill to spill, and if the for example in a structural trap where the seal is through a fault, if the sealing capacity of the fault is 100% or if it's leaky. In producing fills, of course, we can detect depletion and its progression with time, with later wells, and this information is very useful to calibrate simulation models. Additionally, formation testers, the modern formation testers, they are very, very advanced. They have a lot of capabilities. They are modular. They can be adapted to each and every situation in a specific, and they can be customized basically for each job. And they can provide the permeability information, and they can collect fluids and run mini production or mini injectivity tests. And also they can provide information on vertical permeability of the formation with the proper tool configuration. So this is I will just get out of the presentation mode if I can. Okay. This is a simple model I did in Excel that I created to calculate the differential pressure at the top of a trap, basically. So let me just open the Excel. I hope you will. You still see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with this model, I can simulate, for example, an oil and gas accumulation. I can change, for example, the top of the structure. For example, if I want to put it at 2,550, that is changing, and the differential pressure at the top of the structure is corrected automatically. I can change the depth of the gas oil contact, the free water level. I can change the densities of the fluids. So, for example, if I have fresh water, you see that immediately everything moves to the left because the gradient is changed. I can change, let's say, let's go back to normal saline water. I can change the oil density so that you see that if I increase my oil density, the inclination of the oil leg, the red part of the curve, gets closer to the one of the water. And finally, I can also change the inclination of the density of the gas. So this little tool was created just to calculate, as I said, the differential pressure at the top of a trap, and it's like a ideal model of what you would find in the ideal world when you start acquiring pressure data. Unfortunately, the reality is much different. Let me go back to presentation mode. Okay, the reality is much different. So often you will find shale barriers between sands that mask the real position of contact, and you have to infer contacts. Sometimes it's easy to do that. Sometimes you can only assume that two sands are in hydraulical communication, but you never heard the certainty, at least not with pressure data, static pressure data. You will need the dynamic data for that. But that's why, in the industry, we have all these terms like a gas down to, oil up to, water up to, that have been created when you cannot really be sure where your free water level or gas oil contacts are. The picture at the bottom, you will see that on the left, in case of a continuous sandstone or reservoir, you can put your finger on the contact. In the center, it's masked by the presence of a shale barrier. And on the right, it's basically you will never be sure where the free water level is unless you drill a well down dip and you find the oil water contact, oil gas contact, water gas contact. And you may never be able to do that. Sometimes wells are not drilled that far off the structure to investigate the real position of the free water level. This is another example of stacked sands, which are basically lenticular, and they are not in communication. So each sand is separated from the other, and it's very tempting to draw a line on through all the gas points and say this is just one accumulation. And we will see later that there are ways to actually find or determine if something like this is just a continuous gas leg or it's divided in several accumulations. So in this case, if you connect all the gas points with a line, you would get a 0.41 psi per foot gradient, which is it's very close to that of water. It's inconsistent to the find of tests and logs. So you have help from other data to correctly interpret this pressure data. This is a special case. This is the Karachaganak field in Kazakhstan, which has a very thick hydrocarbon column. It's over 1.5 kilometers. And in this case, due to basically gravitational segregation, the composition of the gas column gets lighter and lighter as you go towards the top. So basically, the resulting line that you would find with a pressure testing tool would not be a straight line, but would be a curve rather. But this is it's something that happens with the right conditions, especially in very thick accumulations like this one. Another thing that is detected with the use of pressure testing tool is overpressure. So, for example, we see on the left the example of a well in Egypt. onshore, where basically at each major sill there is an increase in the pressure. So each subsequent deeper reservoir is shifted towards higher pressures, and that of course requires a very careful well design to be able to reach deep targets. The example on the right is a field in the North Sea, where you can see that there are different compartments, and each compartment has a different aquifer pressure. So the inclination of the aquifers gradients is the same, so same composition, but they are shifted, so they are separated from each other. And towards the top, excuse me 1 second. Yeah, towards the top here, you can see some oil legs here and here, but most of the points align on shifted water gradients. Next. Okay, then we can use pressure data to actually investigate if a structure is filled to spill, as I said. In this case, is just a fold seal that can be leaky across from the reservoir to its adjacent just opposed reservoir across the fold, or it can be leaky through the fold itself. So once you find that the structure is not filled, then you have to ask yourself why it's not filled. It might be due to incomplete charge, or it might be due to a leaky structure, as in this case. So these are all information that are very useful for possible development or exploration. So what are some basic checks that I recommend doing when you start looking at pressure data? Deviation survey, datum elevation, and the case of re-entered wells. So it's a good rule to just go find if they are available, of course, the relevant files like deviation surveys, various reports, geological drilling reports, daily drilling reports, and check if they are all consistent with each other, if there are mistakes. Especially in deviated wells, the deviation survey files are very, very important. Keep in mind that sometimes they are typed, and typos are common. So even if the data has been viewed and used by many people, errors might still be there, and it's a good thing if you can, spot them. So you can, for example, with an Excel file, when you have your data in an Excel file, you can easily use formulas to find obvious outliers that don't make any sense. They should not be there, and look for a solution. And also for re-enter wells, of course, the datum for a re-enter well might not be the same as the original when the well was drilled. So it's always good to reconcile the two datums in order to avoid mistakes. Depth correlation correction. Well, normally a correlation run is well, of course, it's something that is always done. It's something that it's always done to make sure that you take your pressure point at the intended depth. But there may still be mistakes. So sometimes even a correlation run can be a little bit subjective. So there might be small depth errors, and sometimes even small depth errors when you're looking at subtle pressure variation, as we will see later, can make a difference. If the tool was run on a drill string, of course, it's always good to check the pipe tally if you find inconsistencies in the depths. And of course, the tool calibrations. So check the tool calibrations and parameters to make sure that the tool was prepared for the job in advance. And also the after calibrations, if any, to make sure that nothing bad happened during the job that may have compromised one or more of the pressure points that were acquired during the job. I also like when it's possible to look at the operational history of the well. So look at anything that happened between the time when the formation was drilled to when the pressure data was acquired. Because this information may help understand unexpected or unusual results. And always use, drilling reports, daily geological reports, daily mud logging reports, daily mud reports for the characteristics of the mud. This is an example of 3 wells. So the first 2 were drilled in 2002. This is from Deepwater Gulf of Mexico. The third one was drilled later, 6 years later, and there was a problem with the correlation. So apparently the data showed a shifted gradient, but when the depth was checked and the error was corrected, the 2 data sets fell right on top of each other. So there was no different compartment, let's say, as suggested by the chart. So this is a very, very important check to do. Temperature stabilization. So also, if you can put your hands on the operational sequence of the wireline job, check if the engineer took the time to wait a little bit inside the casing shoe with the tool before starting the job, just to allow the tool to acclimatize, let's say. So, the temperature of the tool starts to equalize with the temperature of the mud. The pressure data acquisition should not be rushed, so it's a good practice to allow a few minutes between each test for the tool temperature to stabilize, especially if the depth distance between successive pressure points is considerable. I mean, if you're moving 1 or 2 meters, is not a big deal, but if you're moving 30 meters, 50 meters, or 100 meters, then you have to allow time for the tool to stabilize its temperature. And if that was not done, you should be treating the data with caution, and you should be ready to drop from the interpretation unstable or questionable data. And then the check that is always recommended is also the hydrostatic pressure. So to check that the difference between the hydrostatic pressure reading before the test and after the test is within a few psi. The difference, there's always a difference. I've never seen two hydrostatic before and after being exactly the same value, because of many different reasons. There can be some solid settling in the mud column, so that there's a slight density change, losses, micro losses, temperature changes, substandard mud systems that can, basically reduce, basically continue filtering into the formation, and therefore concentrating the solids and changing the density of the mud itself, and also tides for offshore. So tests that show a large difference between the before and after pressure, hydrostatic pressure, should be discarded, even if they look okay. because you cannot be sure that they are actually. So it's better to get rid of them. And finally, the pressure stabilization. So at the end of each build-up of each pretest, the pressure should be stable. So you should get a pressure reading of a stable pressure. What does stable mean? This changes according to different operators. So some say 0.5 psi per minute, some say 0.1 psi per minute. It depends. And this is due to the fact that pressure data acquisitions take time, and time is precious, especially when you are offshore and you're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for each day that you spend operating the well and drilling the well. So in high permeability formation, pressure stabilization is normally reached in a matter of seconds. In low permeability, then it's a different story. It can take a very long time. Despite the use of special tools like very large diameter probes or packer assemblies like the Saturn, and that depends on how the operator thinks the data is how much value the operator puts on the pressure data that they are acquiring. Most of the times, if you are on the rig site and you see that the pressure is increasing too slowly, you just drop the point, say it's a tight point, and you move on to the next, just to save rig time. And also to avoid possible tool sticking, because staying stationary with a wireline tool for too long time can be risky. Also, incomplete pressure buildups can also be extrapolated using a couple of methods, but they needed to be treated with caution because they could be influenced by supercharging, which is something we will talk about later. Now, data filtering. In high permeability formations, data filtering is normally minimal or not necessary. A good indicator of permeability, which is the main instrument we have to filter data, is the drawdown mobility, which is normally calculated after each test. Data points with low drawdown mobility should be treated with care or just filtered out in order to obtain, let's say, a more precise interpretation. If the drawdown mobility is not available, you can also use time. So you set a time limit and you basically drop all the points that have been stabilized above that time, right? And this can be very, very subjective. I mean, it can be from 1 to several minutes. I saw people using 40 seconds, for example. I've seen people using 5 minutes. So it depends. Or it can be calculated, and there is the paper reference in the slide that you can go and check by yourself. In general, of course, pressure buildup should be smooth, and the rate of pressure increase should decrease progressively. So it should be an asymptotic growth, let's say. So watch out for spikes, jumps, or irregular buildups that they tell you that there's something not quite right, which could be probe plugging or seal failure, partial seal failure, just some micro filtration, micro failure. Then, so the hydrostatic pressure of the mud is getting in the system that you are measuring with. This is a couple of examples. On the left is a good test. So you have setting the probe, the drawdown, the build-up. On the two tracks on the right are a bigger, let's say, a bigger scale. One is the strain gauge, which is kind of less precise but also less sensitive to temperature variations. And the one on the right is the quartz gauge, which is more precise and accurate, but also more prone to temperature stabilization problems. So basically, on the left, there's a good test with a relatively quick build-up stabilization. On the right, instead, you see that at a certain point, it looks like it's going to stabilize, but then the pressure starts increasing again. And there are also some spikes, which basically tells you that the pressure is now going back towards the hydrostatic, and that's a seal failure. Supercharging. Supercharging is basically a phenomenon that is always present. The pressure formation testers, they measure pressure at the borehole face, the borehole wall, and therefore they are influenced somehow by the hydrostatic borehole pressure. If you see in the picture on the bottom, the pressure profile across the mud cake and into the formation, you have a very large pressure drop across the filter cake, and there is a little bit of pressure drop also through the formation. So in high permeability formation, this drop is minimal, and it can be neglected because it's basically it's not important. In low permeability formation, instead, it can be a problem because the pressure dissipation takes a lot of time and space to occur. So when you go and use your formation tester, you measure something that is not really representative of the undisturbed formation pressure. There's something added to it. If this effect is high, let's say more than 10 or 20 psi, it's pretty easy to be spotted. Just looking at the pressure value of the point compared to maybe higher permeability points adjacent, above and below. In case it's lower, then it can be challenging just to spot, and it's actually better to just filter out the points based on the low drawdown mobility value. Supercharging can be modeled, and it depends on a few parameters like the radius of the filter cake, the radius of the influence of the mud filtration, and also on the permeability of the mud cake and of the formation, and of course on the overbalance of the hydrostatic over the formation pressure. But this kind of modeling and corrections are very, very rarely applied. Right. This is an example from the Villano field. I don't remember exactly where it is, to be honest. And maybe some of you will know about that. But basically, the first interpretation tool is a pressure versus depth plot like this one, where basically hydraulically continuous reservoirs with the same reservoir fluid appear as a straight line. And the inclination of the straight line gives you basically the density of the fluid, the gradient and the density of the fluid. So it is common to try to fit straight lines to pressure data points, and it's it's very tempting. In this case, it's kind of difficult to see where exactly the free water level is, because the density of the oil and the density of the water are not very far apart from each other, so the inclination of the two straight lines is pretty similar. These plots, they are not always the best way to find out the position of fluid contacts. This is an example from offshore South America, where you can see the fit of the water lines is very good. The correlation coefficient is very close to 1. While for the oil leg in yellow, the yellow points, the correlation coefficient is kind of lower, and you can see a little bit of scatter. The calculated free water level is at 5,440 meters TVD subsea. Now, if you go ahead and filter the points in the oil leg, especially according to the drawdown mobility, what happens is that you remove most of the scatter. Your correlation coefficient improves considerably, and also the free water level goes down by 6 meters, which is not bad actually. And this, you know, in some cases, a variation like this could really make or break a development from a commercial point of view. So these are differences that are quite important to spot. This is another example. So here, where is this from? I don't remember. I don't remember where this, which part of the world this field is. But anyway, so you can see here on the left the pressure versus depth plot, and the author also plotted the drawdown mobility on a logarithmic scale and decided to basically filter out all the points that are less than 2 millidarcy per centipoise out of the plot. And the result is this. So you can see that if I switch back and forth, on the left side of on the left picture, you can see that the scatter of the points is gone. The gradients can be defined much more precisely, and so you reduce the uncertainty on the contacts. Here on the right, there is the excess pressure plot, which is what I am going to introduce next, which is a very useful additional tool to interpret the data. So it's based on a simple concept, but because most of the pressure variation in the pressure depth plots are caused by the weight of the fluids. If you remove the weight of the fluids, the effect of the weight of the fluids, you can start looking at very subtle, small differences that are caused by variation in densities and pressure barriers. And these are very useful plots that can unlock a lot more information. The magnitude of the excess pressure has less meaning than the expression, the differences calculated using a specific datum and fluid density. And it's easiest to interpret if the fluid density chosen to calculate the excess pressure is the dominant reservoir fluid density. So in this case, for example, it's been done using the water. Let's say this is water and this is oil. They use the water density, so all the water points fall on a vertical line, while the oil points deviate towards the right. Basically, in this kind of plot, a single fluid, a single static fluid with constant density and in hydraulic communication will show up as basically as a straight line, okay, at all depths. the interesting thing is that you can build these plots using either the water or the oil as basically reference fluid, so that in case of you use the water, then the water points will fall on a vertical line and the oil points will deviate on an oblique line. If you use the oil, it's the oil line, the oil points that will fall on a vertical line, and the water points will be on an oblique line. So, and you know, it's very easy to spot the contact depths on this kind of plots. And they are also good. This is another example where we have, for example, a water leg, we have an oil leg, and a gas cap, let's say. So in this case, the oil density was used to calculate the excess pressure plot. So both the water points and the gas points will appear on oblique lines, while only the oil points will be on a vertical line. And then you can easily spot the contact depths. I found that also there is another plot which is even easier to build, which is the gradient plot. So basically, instead of plotting the pressure versus depth, you divide pressure by depth and you plot this ratio against depth. So it's very quick to apply because you just do a formula in an Excel spreadsheet and you just replace in the chart, you replace the pressure with the ratio between pressure and depth. And it does not require a datum or a specific fluid to be calculated, and has the same capability to highlight pressure differences and barriers and fluid contacts. Mind that the calculated gradient has no physical meaning. It's not representative of the real fluid gradient, and I will show you how it should be treated. So this is an example of a dry hole onshore in Chad, in the Doba Basin, and these are all water points. So on the chart on the left, one may be tempted to draw maybe one water line through these points, maybe one water line through these points, and then there's a little shift here, maybe a third water line there. But when you do the gradient plots, you realize that basically many of these intervals are separated from each other and they have barriers between them. Now, the gradient that I calculated for each of these intervals, it's not the value of that shows up on the plot. It's the value of the line that I drew on the chart on the left, and I calculated the gradient for each of these little intervals. So that's why these values here, when you calculate the ratio between the pressure and the depth, they have no real physical meaning. You should be they are just useful to build the chart, but they should not be regarded as meaningful. This is an example in Algeria, a field in the Triassic Taghi. 3 wells in a structurally complex field, and there was this pressure data acquisition. The operator did this interpretation, okay, and I think there are several problems with this interpretation. Okay, so for example, in this oil leg here, the green dotted line, they put points from well number 2 in red and well number 1 in green, but you can see that the points on well number 1 are slightly off the line, so this difference is not highlighted. Then there is this water line. There is a second water line which has a different gradient, okay? And here they put free water level and at this position, 9360.6 feet, but there are water points above the free water level. So this derivation of this free water level is incorrect, because clearly if these two sands were, or whatever, these two intervals were in contact, I mean, the contact would be somewhere else, because you cannot have water points above a free water level. The two calculated gradients are, in this case, is 1.18 kilograms per let's say per liter of density, and this is 1.08, which is kind of problematic because they are from the same stratigraphic interval and they're very close to each other. So such a difference in salinity would be kind of difficult to explain. Okay, so if you do the gradient plot of this same data, first of all, in the oil lag, you realize immediately that there's two separate gradients. So the oil gradient in well 1 and in the oil gradient in well 2 are not the same. So most likely they are separated. There is a separation. And given the structural map of the field, I can really understand that. The water points, they all fall on the same, more or less, vertical line. So it's highly likely that the water from the Taggy, the lower Taggy in red, and the upper and middle Taggy in yellow here are on the same hydraulic regime. So it's just one aquifer. There's no difference. The difference between 118 and 108 would basically require roughly one would be 150,000 ppm and the other one should be over slightly over double. So to have a salinity difference within the same field and the same stratigraphic interval, it's very difficult to explain, in my opinion. And for the lower Taggy, there are basically too few points to draw to, let's say, confidently draw a gradient. If you can see here, they draw lines on just 2 points for the oil and 2 points for the water, which it's really not enough, let's say. Here I have another special case, sort of. This is a pressure acquisition in a very low permeability formation. We're talking about something between 0.01 and 0.1 millidarcies. And you can see there's the hydrostatic pressure here on the marked by the blue square, which is 4,773 psi. The packer was set, the pretest was done. The first pretest was 2.5 square centimeters, very small by volume, because of course with low permeability you cannot draw large volumes. You have to be very gentle on low permeability formation. So basically what happens, the pressure goes up and goes above the hydrostatic. So the engineer said, what's going on? He did a second pretest, smaller. This time it's something like, I think it's 1.4, 1.5 cubic centimeters. And the pressure starts again building. and starts growing and growing, growing at a level which is way higher than the hydrostatic pressure. Then he tried to basically increase the force with which the packer is pushed against the formation, but he just got very inconsistent and irregular results until he basically aborted the test, and the hydrostatic pressure after the test is exactly as before, because it's just a few psi difference from 4773 to 4768. It's like 5 psi difference, which is reasonable. And look at the duration of this test. It's over an hour. These are minutes, so it's considerable time for pressure test. And this was done with extra large diameter probe, because it was known that the formation was low permeability. So if I zoom in, basically, this is the interpretation of the wireline engineer. That's the hydrostatic pressure on the left. There's the buildup. The pressure seems to kind of stabilize and then starts growing. That's the reason that he tried to basically, he did a second pretest. So second pretest, the pressure comes up, seems to stabilize more or less at the same pressure where it did on the first pretest, and then it starts growing and has some blips, some jumps and spikes, until he decided to, as I said, to increase the force that pushes the packer against the formation. But I mean, how can you have a formation pressure that is higher than the hydrostatic if you have drilled overbalance? So what happened is that the section was drilled with 1.66 SG mud, which was then weighed up to 1.7 prior to logging. Some of the tool strings had difficulties reaching TD, and they also experienced some sticking episodes. So they decided to perform a wiper trip and increase the mud to 1.73. And while they were circulating, the ECD, the equivalent circulation density, was 1.83, and this is calculated. It's not the real ECD, it's just calculated. So the interpretation is that this whole section was actually drilled slightly underbalanced because of the low permeability. Nothing bad happens. There was no inflow, and the pressure was trapped during the wiper trip and was kind of released by the pretest. So when the pretest created the drawdown, this kind of excess pressure that had been trapped in the formation showed up and was detected by the pressure reading. So if you don't have the full operational history of the well, you would never be able to understand something like this. So it's very important to use all the well information when you need to interpret data of pressure data. So in conclusion, pressure data are very valuable. They give us a whole lot of different kind of informations, provided they are properly QC'd and filtered to make sure that only the good data, robust, reliable points are interpreted. They arrive to the interpretation. The operational history of the well can provide very, very important information for a geologically sensible interpretation. Basic checks should always be performed when the information to do that is available. And I recommend that you plot the data is plotted in different ways to highlight very subtle variations that can have a large financial impact on a project. And also never rush to draw gradient lines, because it's it can be they can be misleading, let's say. And thank you very much. I think that's the end of my talk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paulo, for this interesting session. I think
Very welcome.
all the attendees benefited a new information about the MDT RFT treatment and interpretation. So just for now, we have some questions.
Of course.
A question from Mr. Afif. He is asking about the supercharging effect.
Yes.
He is saying regarding a supercharging test, you said that it influenced by mud pressure, which it should be higher pressure, but into the graph, the pressure trend tended to drop lower. Please explain the sign of supercharging test while in real-time acquisition.
Okay, let me see if I can go back to hold on a second. Supercharging. This slide, I think. Is this slide he's referring to?
Mr. Afif, could you answer? Mr. Afif, could you answer? Okay, I think that, okay, so I think that he is asking about the supercharging sign. So if you can explain one more.
Let me just read. Regarding the supercharging test, you said that it's influenced by mud pressure, yes, which it should be higher pressure, but in the graph, the pressure trend tend to drop. Yeah, I need to understand which graph is referring to, because otherwise it's difficult.
Mr. Afif, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, Mr. Paulo.
Hi.
Yes, nice to meet you. Yes, yes, is it correct? The slide is in the slide.
Yes.
So my understanding that the supercharging is have additional pressure from the hydrostatic mud pressure, right?
It's basically it's slightly influenced by the hydrostatic mud pressure. So if you see my pointer, basically that's the mud pressure. Then you get into the mud cake, and there's a big pressure drop because the permeability of the mud cake ideally is very, very low. Then you get into a low permeability formation. The real static formation pressure is this level here, but there is, it takes a little bit of space into the borehole wall to really reach the static formation pressure. Since with the RFT we measure here at the borehole wall, then you measure something that is slightly higher than the static formation pressure. That's the supercharging effect. Is that clear?
Okay. Okay, I get the point.
Good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Afif.
Any other questions?
Yes, another question from Mr. Joan. He is saying that in the tight reservoir example, would it be possible of interpret that the section was overpressure? What would be difference with respect to the trapped pressure interpretation?
Well, it could probably be another sort of interpretation. The fact that basically, let me just go back to the plot. There it is. So the difference in pressure is considerable because you have a hydrostatic pressure, which is 4,773, and this maximum pressure that was recorded was 5,079 psi. So you have something like 300 psi of difference. Okay, so if you would drill something with 300 psi under balance, I mean, it's unlikely that you would not have any flow. I mean, the well would be, you would see a gain at the mud pits, even with low permeability. If the underbalance is not very much, like, for example, it looks in here when it's stabilized, sort of stabilized before starting to grow again, the pressure level was something like 4,825. So you would have something like a 50 psi difference, which is not that great. So that would probably, if that is the real pressure of the formation, then you would possibly not get any flow when you are drilling due to the low permeability of the formation. With 300 psi, it's a little bit more difficult. So and also you can see that if the engineer had kept measuring, had done nothing but kept recording pressure, the pressure was still growing. So I don't know until which value it would have gone. So it's possible that this trap pressure is more than this 5,080 or 5,079 psi. So the difference would be even more than the 300 psi we see here. And it's a bit unlikely that you manage to drill a well with such a high underbalance without realizing it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Another question about, is there any special software for analyzing MDT data?
Yes, there are some packages out there which are not, I don't think they are extremely expensive, like, I don't know, I'm talking about Petrel or stuff like that, which are very, very expensive, but they still cost money. To be honest, I have always used Excel, and I mean, maybe with these packages you manage to obtain some better looking charts. You have some higher, more flexibility, capability to look at the data, but I don't think they can really do much more than you can do in Excel, to be honest. So Excel to me is more than enough.
Okay, thank you. Another question, he is asking about the fluid context.
Yes.
What is the accurate depth for this context? The context that we got from the logs on the context that we got from the RFT?
That's a good question. Well, the RFT normally can detect the free water level. With the logs, it's more likely that you're gonna see a contact which is higher, or I mean, normally it's higher. It depends on what kind of rocks you're dealing with, but normally, let's say an oil water contact is higher than the free water level. So, and that is what is mostly detected by logs with the saturation. Well, let's say with the bulk volume of water that you calculate from logs.
Okay. The last question, he is saying, how would thin layers behave if you are using dual bucker, straddle bucker, instead of single probe? would it still possible to get gradient?
I believe so, yes, because thin. It's unlikely that thin layers are, let's say, hydraulically independent of each other, because the separation that is between the thin layers is also thin. So normally it cannot hold a high, let's say, pressure differential. So if you find a sequence, let's say, of 15 meters of thin layers, when I'm talking about thin layers, I'm talking about something in the centimeter scale, or even less, then with a straddle packer, you would be able, yes, to get a gradient. I think that it's yeah, could be.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think that so just the last question.
Yes.
How does hole geometry affect the data?
Whole geometry.
Yes.
Well, whole geometry affects the acquisition, not the data. Meaning that when you have, for example, an ovalized hole, for example, and you're using a circumferential packer like the Saturn, for example, it's not a good place to set the packer, because the packer is circular. It has a little bit of flexibility, but if you have a lot of hole ovalization, you will never get a seal. In terms of breakouts, for example, because you don't have the ability to orient your MDT tool or FT tool when you are taking pressures. So you don't really know if the packer is going into the let's say broken up section, the ovalized, let's say, wings of the hole, or it's going into the part that is under tensile stress. So it might be affected, meaning that you also might not get a seal because the whole irregularity, or because of the rock starts to be broken up. There's microfracturation going on, and even if the seal, your packer is correctly placed on the formation, maybe there's a hydrostatic pressure that gets through this microfracturation and to the probe, and it compromises the seal. So that's what I think is the most important effect on the acquisition, not on the pressure data itself.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paulo. Actually, if you have a time, some of Mr. Afif send a chart into the Zoom chat. If you can look at, and also Mr. Afif, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, Mr. Paulo, thank you, and for administration. I already sent the picture and the message chat. Can you see, Mr. Paulo?
Hold on. Yes.
Yes. If you can see, I sent the graph of the pressure test.
Yes.
And as you can see, the trend of the pressure is going up, and if we wait until a couple minutes, it's still unstable. It's still increasing. It cannot be stable.
Yes. So basically, here the engineer did several pretests. Okay, so he set the packer. I see the formation pressure is. Let me just zoom in a little bit. How do I zoom in here? Okay, hold on a sec. Formation pressure. 250, 3,000, 250. It's something like, I don't know, maybe 1,400. Okay. and then after the packer is set, it drops, and after the first pretest is done, it drops and starts climbing. Then there's a second pretest, a third pretest, a fourth pretest, and a fifth pretest. And then the pressure, as you can see, at about, let's say, 350 seconds seems to stabilize, okay? And then after 380 seconds, it starts growing again. And it's a very sort of kind of steady growth. It slows down a little bit towards the end, but I think that this is a lost seal. So there's a microfiltration from the borehole into the packer, to the probe, basically. And you will end up, if you stayed until, I don't know, many more minutes, you would end up with the hydrostatic pressure. So I would interpret this as a seal failure.
Okay, so is it okay for you, Mr. Afif? Mr. Afif, are you here?
Yes. So it will be called as low seal, not supercharging, Mr. Paulo.
No, this is not supercharging. This is it looks like a seal failure to me.
Seal failure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mas Paulo.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I think that it will be the end for our webinar. For sure, we enjoyed this interesting discussion and also interesting information that you shared, Mr. Paulo. We are appreciating that very, very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed the time spent with you guys.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Paulo. Also, I would like to thank the attendees for their time attending the session. And I would like to remind the attendees that if you wanted to get a certificate for attendance, we sent a link for a form that should be filled into the Zoom chat. Also, if you would like to enroll into the upcoming workshops that will be into June and July, petroleum economics and integrated production modeling, you can also enroll into the form that were sent into the Zoom chat. So thank you all for your time and hope you good night, inshallah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paulo. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.